Human thought he was just working out, but alien girl saw a legendary fighter. He was just doing push-ups in the far corner of the alien observatory yard, early morning Earth time. Shirt off, no audience, just the metal floor under his palms and the weight of a restless mind. Eli Vance, technician, not a soldier, not assigned security clearance, just a human. Fixes broken doors, reprograms vending units, replaces dead power cells. But today he needed to sweat, and so without fanfare, he trained. Push-ups, squats, core holds, controlled breathing, fast punches against nothing. A rhythm he built for himself long before space knew his name. The cool metal floor pressed against his palms as he lowered himself for the 78th push-up. His muscles burned, but the sensation was welcome, a physical pain to drown out the noise in his head. Dawn hadn't yet broken over the curved dome of the observatory yard. The massive transparent ceiling revealed a canvas of stars, distant and indifferent to his exertions below. Sweat dripped from his forehead, creating tiny dark circles on the polished floor. Eli's breathing remained controlled, measured. Inhalation for 4 counts, hold for 4, exhalation for 4. A technique he'd learned years ago when the panic attacks first started, before the medication, before the therapy, before the assignment to Nexus Station as part of Earth's technical exchange program. He transitioned smoothly to mountain climbers, his body moving with practiced precision. The observatory yard was empty at this hour, or so he thought. The cavernous space designed for viewing celestial phenomena served as his personal training ground in these early hours before the station fully awakened. His mind drifted as his body worked. Last night's dream lingered, the same one that had visited him for weeks now. Falling through endless space, no suit, no ship, just the cold vacuum stealing his breath as distant stars watched his demise. He always woke just before the end, gasping, sheets soaked with sweat. The station psychologist called it an adjustment response, common for first-time space travelers. But Eli had been on Nexus for 6 months now. The dreams should have stopped. He pushed himself harder, moving into a series of explosive burpees that left him momentarily weightless before gravity pulled him back to the floor. The impact jarred his bones, sending shockwaves up his arms, real, tangible sensations to anchor him in the present. The observatory yard's ambient lighting began its programmed brightening sequence, simulating Earth's sunrise. Gold and amber hues painted the metal surfaces, warming the sterile environment. Eli paused, chest heaving, to wipe sweat from his eyes. The view above never failed to disorient him. Stars where morning sky should be, a perpetual night broken only by the station's artificial lighting. He dropped to the floor for a plank position, holding his body rigid as a board. 1 minute. 2. His arms trembled slightly, but he didn't relent. Physical discipline was the one constant he'd maintained across light years, the one familiar ritual in an unfamiliar world. The Naxians, the alien species that operated Nexus Station, didn't seem to have an equivalent to physical training. Their slender, almost translucent bodies were built for efficiency rather than power. They moved with graceful economy, never wasting energy. The concept of deliberately exhausting oneself seemed to perplex them, which was precisely why Eli chose the observatory yard for his workouts. Remote, rarely used during early hours, a place where he wouldn't have to field curious questions about human exercise habits. 3 minutes in plank position. His core muscles screamed for relief, but he pushed through the discomfort. Just 30 more seconds. The countdown in his head was interrupted by a faint sound, something between a click and a whistle. Eli held his position, ears straining. There it was again, the distinctive sound of Naxian communication. He wasn't alone. Slowly, he lowered himself to the floor and rolled onto his back, beginning a series of leg raises as if he hadn't noticed anything. From this position, he could scan the perimeter of the yard without being obvious. There, in the shadowed alcove near the eastern entrance, a slender figure stood partially concealed. The delicate, elongated head and luminescent skin markings identified the observer as Naxian. Female, based on the teal coloration of those markings. Eli continued his exercises, pretending not to notice his audience. It wasn't the first time one of the station's alien inhabitants had observed him with curiosity. Usually they would approach with direct questions once discovered. This one seemed content to merely watch. He finished his circuit with a series of controlled breathing exercises, sitting cross-legged on the floor, eyes closed. The weight in his mind had lifted somewhat, burned away by exertion. As he centered himself, he could sense the Naxian observer still lingering in the shadows, watching with what he imagined was their species' version of fascination. Let her watch, he thought. His routine wasn't a secret, just private. Besides, what could possibly interest a being from an advanced spacefaring civilization about simple human calisthenics? Eli had no idea that this quiet morning workout would spark something far beyond his understanding, something that would transform his identity on Nexus Station and challenge everything he believed about himself. He was just a man training until they all started watching. She watched him from the shadows. Nolly, alien observer, third cycle. Not ranked, not royal, just curious. Her eyes weren't even focused at first, but then she saw his form, his precision, the control in every motion, the focus like a predator with no prey, and something inside her cracked open. "What is he preparing for?" she asked aloud. Another alien girl beside her shrugged. "Earth males train alone, like it's a prayer. But look at him. That's not ritual. That's readiness." "For what?" Nolly's eyes narrowed. "War." Nolly hadn't intended to observe the human that morning. She had come to the observatory yard to complete her atmospheric readings, a routine task assigned to third-cycle observers. The station's position relative to the nearby nebula created optimal conditions for collecting data just before the artificial dawn sequence. But the rhythmic movement had caught her peripheral vision, something primal and fascinating in its raw physicality. Nolly's slender fingers tightened around her data collection device as she watched the human. Eli Vance, according to the identification tag on his discarded shirt. She had seen humans before, of course. The Earth delegation had arrived at Nexus Station 2 stellar cycles ago, bringing their curious customs and inefficient biological processes with them. But she had never seen one like this. His movements weren't just physical exertion. They contained precision, purpose, each motion flowing into the next with disciplined control. Sweat glistened on his skin, catching the gradually increasing light as the dawn sequence progressed. His facial expression remained unchanged, focused, intense, as if fighting an invisible opponent. Nolly felt Treslin's presence before she heard her approach, the faint luminescent glow of her fellow observer reflected off the polished wall. "Your atmospheric readings are incomplete," Treslin whispered in their native tongue, a series of melodic clicks that humans couldn't properly hear. "The Elder will notice." Nolly didn't turn away from the human. "Look," she responded, nodding toward Eli's training form. Treslin followed her gaze, head tilting in the characteristic Naxian expression of mild curiosity. "A human engaging in physical activity. They do this regularly." "Not like this," Nolly insisted. Her inner eyelids flickered rapidly, a sign of intense interest among her species. "This is different." "Different how?" Nolly struggled to articulate what had captured her attention so completely. The Naxian language, with its emphasis on empirical observation and collective experience, lacked certain concepts. "What is he preparing for?" she asked aloud, switching to the common trade language that humans could understand. Treslin shrugged, the movement unnaturally stiff, an adopted human gesture that never looked quite right on Naxian physiology. "Earth males train alone, like it's a prayer." "But look at him. That's not ritual. That's readiness." Nolly's inner eyelids flickered again as the human transitioned to swift, controlled punching movements against the air. Each strike precise, economical, deadly in its simplicity. "For what?" Treslin asked, her interest finally piqued. Nolly's eyes narrowed as understanding crystallized within her. "War." The word hung between them, heavy with implication. Naxians had evolved beyond physical conflict millennia ago. Their history of warfare now just ancient texts studied by specialists. The concept existed for them primarily as academic knowledge, not lived experience. But they recognized its patterns. Treslin studied the human with renewed attention. His personnel file identifies him as a maintenance technician. Level 3 clearance only. No military designation. "Perhaps that's what they want us to believe," Nolly suggested, her voice dropping lower. "The humans have been careful about which personnel they send to Nexus." "You think he's concealing his true function?" Nolly's skin markings pulsed slightly, the Naxian equivalent of thoughtful consideration. "Not necessarily concealing, perhaps waiting." The observation struck Treslin with unexpected force. She straightened, her full attention now on the human's movements. The ancient texts speak of warriors who disguised themselves as ordinary citizens, who lived among the unsuspecting until the moment they were activated. "Sleeper agents," Nolly said. the human term feeling strange in her mouth. That's what Earth histories call them. Below them, unaware of the mythology building around him, Eli Vance completed his circuit with controlled breathing exercises. His chest rose and fell in measured rhythm, eyes closed in concentration. To Nale's watching eyes, he appeared to be entering a meditative trance, perhaps communing with whatever warrior spirit guided his training. "We should report this to the Elder," Treslin suggested, already reaching for her communication device. Nale placed a restraining hand on her companion's arm. "Number, not yet. We need more observations, more data. But if he's truly a human warrior, then we have a rare opportunity to study something they don't intend for us to see," Nale finished. Her scientific curiosity overrode any potential concern. After all, the human hadn't done anything threatening. Quite the opposite. He had chosen the most isolated location for his activities, seemingly intent on avoiding notice, which, to Nale's mind, only made his behavior more intriguing. "I will adjust my observation schedule," she decided, already making mental calculations. "If he maintains a pattern, I can document his techniques." Treslin's skin markings flickered with uncertainty. "Be careful, Nale. Humans are unpredictable. That's precisely what makes them worth studying." As the human gathered his belongings and prepared to leave the observatory yard, Nale withdrew deeper into the shadows. She would return tomorrow, she decided, and the day after, for as long as it took to understand what drove the supposed technician to train with the discipline of a warrior preparing for conflict. What she couldn't possibly know was how quickly her observations would spread among her people, or how dramatically they would transform one ordinary human's existence on Nexus Station. By afternoon, 8 alien girls had come to watch. By evening, word had spread. He's sharpening himself. He hides his true nature behind civilian clothes. He waits for the final conflict. He trains for the fight only he knows is coming. Nale hadn't intended to share her observations beyond Treslin, but information flowed differently among Naxians than humans. Their neural pathways were semi-connected through subtle biochemical signals, creating an empathic network that facilitated rapid communication. Strong emotional responses, like Nale's fascination with the human's training, resonated more powerfully through this network. By mid-afternoon, a small gathering of female Naxians had assembled in the research hub, their luminescent skin markings pulsing with excitement as Nale described what she had witnessed. His movements were precise, economical. "No wasted energy," she explained, using her slender hands to mimic some of Eli's exercises. Each one flowed into the next with perfect control. "Many humans exercise," objected Vashon, a senior researcher specializing in comparative xenobiology. "Their higher muscle density requires regular maintenance." "This was different," Nale insisted. "This wasn't maintenance. This was sharpening, honing, like a blade being prepared." Her choice of metaphor sent a ripple of unease through the gathered Naxians. Their species had evolved away from implements of violence so long ago that such imagery retained a primitive, almost taboo quality. "Did he have weapons?" asked Liren, a junior communications specialist whose fascination with human culture was well known. "His body was the weapon," Nale replied, her inner eyelids flickering rapidly. "You had to see the control in his strikes, the precision, the focus." "And he's classified as a maintenance technician?" Vashon's tone carried skepticism. "According to official records," Treslin confirmed, "Eli Vance, station maintenance, specializing in environmental systems and basic robotics." A thoughtful silence fell over the group as they absorbed this information. Naxian culture valued alignment between official designation and actual function. The concept of hidden identities or concealed purposes existed primarily in their ancient history and fictional narratives. "Perhaps," suggested Liren hesitantly, "he is what humans call a sleeper agent, one who masks their true function until activated." The suggestion ignited immediate interest. Several Naxians began accessing their personal data devices, searching historical archives for information about this human concept. "Earth history contains many examples of warriors who lived as ordinary citizens," noted Vashon, scrolling through translated texts, "particularly in their pre-space era." "He hides his true nature behind civilian clothes," Liren whispered, the idea clearly captivating her imagination. "Living among us, undetected." "But why would Earth send a covert warrior to Nexus Station?" asked a younger Naxian. "Our alliance is peaceful." Nale considered this. Perhaps he waits for the final conflict, some threat only humans can foresee? The speculation spread beyond their immediate circle as the day progressed. By evening meal, the observation had traveled throughout the Naxian community on the station. With each retelling, the details grew slightly more elaborate, the interpretations more certain. In the communal dining hall, clusters of Naxians spoke in hushed tones about the human warrior disguised as a technician. Some claimed he trained in ancient Earth combat techniques forbidden in civilized space. Others suggested he was genetically enhanced, his ordinary appearance a carefully constructed facade. He trains for the fight only he knows is coming, one elderly Naxian told an enraptured group of junior observers. The humans sense something we cannot. They prepare while appearing peaceful. The humans dining in their designated section remained oblivious to the whispers surrounding them, particularly Eli Vance, who sat alone at a corner table, scanning technical schematics on his datapad while absently consuming his meal. His isolation only reinforced the growing mythology. Here was a warrior maintaining his cover, separate even from his own kind. Nali observed him from across the hall, struck by how ordinary he appeared in this setting. His movements were efficient but unremarkable as he ate. No one watching him now would suspect the disciplined precision she had witnessed that morning. It made her wonder what else humans concealed beneath their seemingly simple exteriors. "Will you continue observing him?" Treslin asked, sliding onto the bench beside her. Nali nodded. "Tomorrow, before artificial dawn. If he maintains his pattern, he'll return to the observatory yard." "I've been asked to join you," Treslin said, her skin markings pulsing with slight embarrassment. Several others wished to observe as well. Nali felt a flicker of annoyance. Her discovery was becoming a spectacle rather than a scientific observation, but she couldn't reasonably object. Knowledge sharing was fundamental to Naxian culture. 3 observers maximum, she stipulated. More would risk alerting him. Treslin agreed, though her markings suggested disappointment. "The others can review our recordings." As they finished their meal, Nali noticed something unexpected. Eli Vance was watching them. Not obviously, but she caught his quick glance in their direction before he returned his attention to his technical schematics. It was brief, casual, yet something in his expression suggested awareness. Did he know they were discussing him? Impossible. Humans couldn't detect the subtle biochemical signals of Naxian communication. Yet a strange certainty settled over Nali. He sensed something. Perhaps that was the true nature of a warrior. Heightened awareness. The ability to perceive threats before they materialized. Or perhaps she was being influenced by the growing mythology, seeing patterns where none existed. Either way, she would continue her observations. Tomorrow she would learn more about this human who trained with such purpose. This supposed technician whose precise movements had sparked such fascination throughout Nexus Station. What Nali couldn't possibly anticipate was how quickly their interest would transform from distant observation to direct interaction, or how it would change both the watcher and the watched. Eli found out 3 days later when a group of alien women approached him mid-stretch with glowing eyes and sketchbooks filled with scribbled diagrams of his stances. One of them whispered, "You're the sleeper, right? The what? The last standing warrior of Earth? The one who trains in silence, in exile?" He blinked. "I just like staying in shape." They gasped like he'd quoted ancient poetry. "Such discipline," another one murmured. "No ego. No need to explain himself. Truly legendary." Eli had noticed the subtle changes in his daily interactions. The way conversations hushed when he entered communal spaces. The lingering looks from Naxian station personnel. Even the slight increase in deferential behavior from service units in the cafeteria. Something had shifted, but he couldn't pinpoint what. His morning workouts continued as usual, though he'd begun to sense he wasn't alone in the observatory yard. Occasionally, he caught glimpses of movement in his peripheral vision, heard the faint clicking sounds of Naxian communication. But whenever he looked directly, the shadows revealed nothing. On the 3rd morning, he deliberately arrived earlier than usual, hoping to reclaim the solitude that made the observatory yard so valuable to his mental health routine. The massive space was dark when he entered, the artificial dawn sequence not yet initiated. Stars gleamed overhead through the transparent ceiling, casting faint silvery light across the polished floor. Eli began his warm-up, starting with gentle stretches to prepare his muscles. He reached overhead, elongating his spine, then folded forward to touch his toes. The familiar pull of tight hamstrings grounded him in his body, away from the persistent anxiety that had followed him across light years. He was midway through a deep lunge stretch when the soft hiss of the eastern entrance broke the silence. Eli maintained his position, head turned slightly to monitor the newcomers without appearing to notice them. 4 Naxians entered, moving with their characteristic fluid grace, all female, based on their coloration. They carried what appeared to be personal data devices and something similar to sketchbooks, an odd juxtaposition of advanced technology and primitive recording methods. They positioned themselves at what they clearly thought was a discrete distance, arranging themselves in a semicircle with an excellent view of his training area. Eli continued his stretching routine, mentally debating whether to acknowledge their presence or maintain the pretense of solitude. Curiosity wasn't unusual. Humans were still relatively new to Nexus Station, and cultural exchange was part of his assignment. But this felt different, more focused, almost reverential in its intensity. He decided to proceed with his normal routine. If they wanted to observe, let them. Perhaps they'd grow bored and leave. But as he transitioned into his strength exercises, he noticed them making rapid notes, occasionally conferring in hushed tones. One appeared to be sketching his movements, while another operated what looked like a recording device. This wasn't casual curiosity, it was systematic observation. After completing his third set of push-ups, Eli sat back on his heels and finally turned to face his audience directly. "Can I help you with something?" The Naxians froze, their luminescent skin markings pulsing rapidly in what he recognized as their equivalent of surprise or embarrassment. For a moment, no one spoke. Then one stepped forward, taller than the others with more elaborate markings that suggested higher status or greater age. "We apologize for the intrusion," she said in the formal cadence of the trade language. "We did not wish to disrupt your training." "You're not disrupting," Eli said, rising to his feet, "but I am curious why my morning workout warrants an audience." The Naxians exchanged glances, communicating in that silent way that always left humans feeling slightly excluded. Finally, the leader spoke again. "I am Nali, third cycle observer. My specialization is comparative cultural studies." Eli nodded. "Eli Vance, station maintenance." "Yes," she said, with an inflection that suggested she didn't entirely believe this designation. "We are aware of your official function." The emphasis on official wasn't lost on Eli. "Is there something about fixing environmental systems that interests you?" Another exchange of glances among the Naxians. One of the younger ones stepped forward, clutching what was definitely a sketchbook filled with drawings. Eli caught glimpses of humanoid figures in various poses that looked remarkably similar to his exercise routine. "You're the sleeper, right?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Eli blinked, genuinely confused. "The what? The last standing warrior of Earth? The one who trains in silence, in exile?" Her inner eyelids flickered rapidly with excitement. He stared at her, then at the others, trying to process this bizarre question. "I just like staying in shape." The response triggered an immediate reaction among the Naxians. They gasped collectively, their skin markings pulsing in synchronized patterns. The one with the sketchbook turned to her companions with an expression Eli recognized as awe. "Such discipline," she murmured. "No ego, no need to explain himself. Truly legendary." Eli ran a hand through his sweat-dampened hair, increasingly bewildered. "I think there's been a misunderstanding. I'm not a warrior or a sleeper, whatever that means. I'm just a technician who exercises regularly." "Of course," Nali said, in a tone that suggested she was humoring him. "Your discretion is understood and respected." "No, I'm serious," Eli insisted. "I'm not hiding anything. This is just physical maintenance, something many humans do." The Naxians exchanged another round of meaningful glances. Eli had the distinct impression his denial was only reinforcing whatever misconception they had formed. "May we continue to observe your training?" Nali asked. "For cultural documentation purposes only." Eli considered refusing, but curiosity won out. Whatever had sparked their interest, it might be worth understanding. Besides, his workout was nothing secret, just standard calisthenics and stress management techniques. "Fine," he conceded. "Just try not to be distracting." He returned to his routine, acutely aware of their focused attention. Occasionally, he heard the soft clicking sounds of their communication, or the faint scratching of whatever they used to make notes. The sensation of being studied so intently was unsettling, but he forced himself to maintain his normal rhythm and intensity. When he finished his final set of exercises and moved into his cooling stretches, Nali approached again. "Your combat forms are most efficient," she observed, "optimized for both offensive and defensive applications." "They're not combat forms," Eli corrected, "just basic fitness exercises." Nali's head tilted slightly, the Naxian equivalent of a knowing smile. "As you say, Technician Vance." The way she said his title made it clear she considered it merely a cover designation. Before Eli could object further, the Naxians withdrew as silently as they had arrived, leaving him alone in the observatory yard with the distinct feeling that something significant had just occurred, though he couldn't quite grasp what. He gathered his belongings, mind racing. Why would the Naxians think he was some kind of warrior in disguise? He had no military training, no combat experience. His personnel file clearly stated his actual qualifications and assignment. Yet something about his simple morning workout had sparked a mythology that was apparently spreading throughout the station's Naxian population. As he headed toward the shower facilities, Eli couldn't shake the unsettling sensation that his identity on Nexus Station had just been fundamentally altered, transforming from anonymous technician to something far more complex in the alien imagination. And he had no idea how to correct their misconception, or if he even should. That night, he stood alone in his room staring at his reflection. He had never fought in a war, never held a weapon beyond a broken pipe wrench, never led anything. But suddenly, every alien girl in that wing of the base moved quietly around him, nodded with reverence, whispered when he passed, like he was something forged, not born. Eli's quarters were standard issue for technical personnel, a sleeping alcove, small hygiene unit, and multi-purpose living area that served as both workspace and dining space. Efficient, functional, impersonal, save for the few Earth artifacts he'd been permitted to bring, a worn paperback novel, a small potted succulent, a photo cube displaying images of the Pacific Northwest where he'd grown up. The lighting hummed softly overhead as he examined himself in the narrow mirror mounted beside the hygiene unit. His reflection stared back, ordinary, unremarkable. Brown hair cut practically short, eyes that people sometimes called intense, but he knew merely contained the watchfulness of someone used to anticipating problems before they escalated. The lean build of a man who worked with his hands and maintained physical discipline out of habit rather than vanity. Nothing about his appearance suggested warrior, nothing marked him as special. Yet throughout the day, the strange reverence had followed him across the station. Naxians paused their conversations when he entered rooms. They stepped aside in corridors, offering slight bows that weren't extended to other human technicians. In the communal dining hall, servers had presented his standard meal with ceremonial flourishes, typically reserved for diplomatic personnel. Even more disconcerting were the humans' reactions. His supervisor had pulled him aside, questioning whether he had special clearance that wasn't noted in his personnel file. 2 engineers from the propulsion team had invited him to their recreational gathering, an unprecedented social overture after months of professional distance. Something had fundamentally shifted in how he was perceived on Nexus Station, all because a group of aliens had misinterpreted his private exercise routine. "This is ridiculous," he told his reflection, voice too loud in the quiet room. "I'm not what they think I am." He had never fought in a war. Earth hadn't engaged in open conflict since the unification 3 decades before he was born. His generation knew violence only through historical records and entertainment media. He had never held a weapon beyond a broken pipe wrench during an emergency repair on a pressure valve, hardly the stuff of warrior legends. He had never led anything more significant than a 3-person maintenance team during his previous assignment at the Houston Arcology. Yet the Naxians had created an entire mythology around him, a fiction that was rapidly becoming more real than the truth in the social ecosystem of Nexus Station. Eli stepped away from the mirror and sank onto the edge of his sleeping platform. The environmental system hummed softly, cycling air through invisible vents. Outside his small viewport, the endless void of space stretched black and infinite, pinpricked with distant stars that offered no counsel. How had this happened? His morning workouts were therapy, not training, a way to manage the persistent anxiety that had plagued him since childhood. The discipline and precision that so impressed the Naxians were simply techniques his therapist had recommended for maintaining mental focus. Each controlled movement, each measured breath, was designed to center his consciousness in his body, preventing the spiral of catastrophic thinking that otherwise consumed him. He wasn't preparing for conflict. He was preventing internal collapse. But explaining that would require revealing his history of anxiety disorders, something his personnel file tactfully omitted. Mental health concerns were still quietly considered potential liabilities in space assignment applications. The station psychologist knew, of course, but patient confidentiality protected that information. Eli ran a hand over his face, feeling the day's tension in his jaw muscles. He could correct the misunderstanding tomorrow. request a meeting with Naxian cultural liaisons, clarify his actual status, explain the purpose of his exercises. But would they believe him? Already their mythology had taken on a life of its own. His denial earlier that day had only seemed to reinforce their conviction, interpreting his words as the appropriate discretion of a covert operative. And there was something else, something he was reluctant to acknowledge even to himself. A part of him didn't hate this new perception. For the first time since arriving on Nexus Station, people looked at him with something other than professional indifference. The reverence in those alien eyes contained recognition of something valuable, something significant, even if it was entirely misplaced. His terminal chimed softly, indicating an incoming message. Eli crossed to the small desk and activated the display. The communication was brief but startling. Technician Vance, your presence is requested at High Council observation tomorrow, 1400 station time. Elder Cashin expresses particular interest in Earth diplomatic security protocols. Appropriate attire suggested. Cultural Exchange Office. Eli stared at the message in disbelief. The High Council, the senior Naxian leadership, wanted to observe him. And what diplomatic security protocols were they referring to? He had no security clearance or diplomatic training. This was spiraling beyond a simple misunderstanding. The mythology was elevating him into station politics, a realm far outside his technical expertise or authority. He would have to correct this immediately before his imagined identity created real complications. Yet as he prepared a response declining the invitation, his fingers hesitated over the interface. What would happen if he simply played along? Not actively promoting the fiction, but not dispelling it either. The thought was tempting, seductive even, to be seen as something more than he was, to wear the projection of strength rather than constantly managing the reality of vulnerability. Eli closed the message without responding, decision postponed until morning. He returned to the narrow mirror, studying his reflection with new awareness. In the artificial light of his quarters, he could almost see what the Naxians saw: the control in his posture, the alertness in his eyes, the economical precision in his movements. Features born from managing anxiety, reinterpreted as markers of disciplined power. But suddenly, every alien girl in that wing of the base moved quietly around him, nodded with reverence, whispered when he passed, like he was something forged, not born. And the most disturbing thought of all crept into his mind. What if they were right? Not about him being a secret warrior or security operative, but about him possessing a strength he himself had never recognized, one forged in the crucible of his own internal battles. Eli turned away from the mirror, leaving the question unanswered as the station's night cycle dimmed his quarters toward darkness. Chapter 6. The question. He wanted to clear it up, until Nale stood in front of him and asked, "Why do you train if you have no battles?" He thought for a moment, then said honestly, "Because sometimes your mind tries to kill you, and your body has to fight back." She stared at him, unblinking, then said, "Then you're stronger than the ones who've seen war." Morning arrived with no clearer direction. Eli completed his maintenance assignments in the environmental control sector, hyper-aware of the changed dynamics around him. Naxian technicians who had previously ignored his presence now observed him with unconcealed interest. His human colleagues treated him with a new wariness, clearly sensing the shift in status without understanding its cause. By midday, Eli had made his decision. He would attend the High Council observation, but would use the opportunity to clarify his actual role and abilities. The misunderstanding had gone far enough. He was heading to the communal dining hall when Nale appeared beside him, moving with the silent grace characteristic of her species. "Technician Vance," she greeted him, using the trade language. "May I accompany you?" Eli nodded, surprised by the direct approach. In his experience, Naxians preferred formal arrangements for interspecies discussions, usually mediated through cultural liaison officers. They walked in silence through the curved corridor, passing mixed groups of humans and Naxians engaged in technical discussions. Eli noticed how conversations paused as they passed, followed by whispered exchanges and quick glances. "You've observed the changed behavior toward you," Nale stated rather than asked. "Hard to miss," Eli replied. "Your people seem to have developed some misconceptions about me." Misconceptions? Her inner eyelids flickered rapidly. Or deeper recognitions? Eli sighed. This was precisely the problem. Any denial was reinterpreted as confirmation of a hidden truth. "I received an invitation to meet the High Council today." "Yes," Nale acknowledged. Your presence has generated significant interest among station leadership. Because they think I'm some kind of secret warrior? Nolly's skin markings pulsed in what Eli had learned was their equivalent of thoughtful consideration. The concept of warrior doesn't fully capture their understanding. Your status is more complex. They reached the dining hall entrance, but instead of entering, Nolly gestured toward a small observation deck nearby. Would you permit a more private conversation? Eli hesitated, then nodded. The observation deck was a semi-enclosed space with transparent walls offering views of the nearby nebula. Public enough to be proper, private enough for discreet conversation. They entered and found it unoccupied, unusual for this time of day. I may have contributed to certain interpretations of your activities, Nolly admitted once they were seated on the minimalist Naxian furniture. My observations of your training session sparked considerable interest. I noticed, Eli said dryly. I've been called the sleeper, whatever that means. It means one who waits, who maintains readiness while appearing dormant. Her silvery eyes studied him with unsettling intensity. Is it truly so inaccurate? Yes, Eli insisted. I'm a technician, not a soldier. My morning exercises are just that. Exercises. Physical maintenance. Then may I ask a direct question? When Eli nodded, Nolly leaned forward slightly. Why do you train if you have no battles? The question caught him off guard with its simplicity and insight. He could have offered the standard explanation, health benefits, stress relief, the vague, it's just what humans do, that often sufficed in cross-cultural misunderstandings. Instead, something compelled him toward honesty. He thought for a moment, organizing his response carefully, then said honestly, because sometimes your mind tries to kill you, and your body has to fight back. The admission hung between them, more vulnerable than he'd intended. Nolly remained perfectly still, her luminescent markings pulsing slowly as she processed his words. She stared at him, unblinking, then said, Then you're stronger than the ones who've seen war. It was Eli's turn to be silent, absorbing the unexpected response. Not dismissal or confusion, but recognition, acknowledgement of an internal battle as legitimate as any external conflict. Most warriors fight external enemies, Nolly continued, visible threats, identifiable opponents. Her markings pulsed more intensely. But you battle something unseen, something within, without recognition, without witnesses to validate your struggle. Eli felt strangely exposed, as if she had accessed parts of himself he rarely acknowledged even in private thought. It's just anxiety, he said, attempting to minimize. Lots of humans deal with it. Do all humans develop such discipline in response? Nolly asked. Such precise control? Such focused intention? No, he admitted after a moment. Most find other ways. Medication, therapy, social support. Yet you chose the warrior's path. Physical discipline as psychological armor. Put that way, his routine did sound more intentional, more significant than he'd ever considered it. I never thought of it like that. Perhaps that is why my people recognize something in you that your own do not, Nolly suggested. Naxians evolved beyond physical conflict millennia ago. But our cultural memory preserves the essence of the warrior archetype, one who transforms fear into controlled action. Eli looked out at the nebula, its swirling gases illuminated by distant stars. The vastness that usually triggered his anxiety felt different with Nolly's perspective reframing his experience. I'm still not what your people think I am, he said finally. I have no special training, no hidden mission, no secret clearance. Yet you have something equally valuable, Nolly countered, the capacity to face inner darkness and emerge disciplined rather than broken. A comfortable silence settled between them as Eli absorbed this perspective. After several minutes, he asked, What should I tell the High Council? They're expecting someone I'm not. Nolly's markings pulsed in what he recognized as their equivalent of a smile. Tell them what you told me. The truth often contains more power than any fiction we could create. As they rose to continue to the dining hall, Eli felt a strange lightness. For the first time since the mythology began spreading, he saw a path forward that neither embraced the false identity nor rejected the core recognition behind it. Thank you, he said as they reached the entrance, for listening, for understanding. Nolly performed the formal Naxian gesture of respect, a movement usually reserved for those of significant status. It is I who must thank you, Eli Vance, for showing us that the warrior spirit takes many forms, some hidden even from those who carry them. As they parted ways inside the dining hall, Eli noticed the usual whispers and glances following him, but they felt different now, less burdensome, less fraudulent. Because somewhere in his conversation with Nale, the mythology had transformed from complete fiction to partial truth, a truth about inner battles and quiet strength that he had never fully acknowledged within himself. He didn't correct her, because for the first time in years, his pain meant something to someone. And if training alone in the dark gave even one person hope, then maybe the myth was better than the truth. The High Council meeting proved surprisingly brief. Eli had prepared a detailed explanation of his actual role and abilities, ready to dismantle the fiction that had grown around him. But when faced with the 7 elder Naxians, their luminescent markings pulsing with dignified interest, different words emerged. He spoke instead about human adaptability, about the various ways his species confronted challenges, both external and internal. He explained his morning routine not as secret combat training, but as a disciplined response to psychological pressure, a method for maintaining function despite the mind's tendency toward disorder. The elders listened with that characteristic Naxian stillness that had initially unsettled him, but now felt like deep attention. They asked few questions, each precisely targeted. Did all humans develop such coping mechanisms? Were physical disciplines common among Earth's leadership? Did he believe his methods could be adapted for Naxian physiology? Eli answered honestly, without pretense or embellishment. At no point did he claim special status or hidden knowledge. Yet he didn't actively dismantle the misconceptions either, allowing the Naxians to draw their own conclusions from his carefully worded responses. When the session concluded, Elder Kashin, the most senior council member present, approached him with the formal gestures of respect. "Your insights have been most valuable, Technician Vance," the elder said, using his official title while somehow investing it with new meaning. "We would welcome your continued contribution to our understanding of human resilience methods." "I'm happy to help however I can," Eli replied with genuine sincerity. "Perhaps," the elder suggested, "you would consider demonstrating your techniques to select observers? Those who might benefit from understanding alternate approaches to mental discipline?" It was a request, not an order, carefully phrased to allow refusal without offense. But Eli found himself nodding. "I could do that, though I should emphasize that I'm not a certified instructor." "Understood," Elder Kashin acknowledged. "Experience often teaches more effectively than certification." As Eli left the council chamber, he realized he had neither embraced the warrior myth nor fully dispelled it. He had instead found a middle ground, one that honored the truth of his experience while allowing the Naxians to see value in it through their cultural lens. The next 3 days brought subtle but significant changes to Eli's station routine. His official duties remained unchanged, but his schedule now included a designated hour each afternoon in Training Hall B, a space usually reserved for diplomatic personnel. There, he demonstrated his exercise routines to a small group of Naxian observers, explaining the purpose behind each movement and breathing technique. Interest grew steadily. By the 4th session, the number of observers had doubled. Eli noticed some participants attempting to mimic his movements, their graceful Naxian physiology adapting human exercises into something new and hybridized. "Your methods are being integrated into certain educational protocols," Nale informed him during one of their now regular conversations in the observation deck, "particularly for young Naxians who struggle with emotional regulation." "Really?" Eli was genuinely surprised. "I wouldn't think human exercises would be helpful for your physiology. The physical forms are merely vehicles," she explained. "It is the underlying principles that translate across species: focused attention, rhythmic movement, controlled breathing. These create similar neurological responses in both our peoples." The knowledge that his personal coping mechanisms might actually benefit others brought unexpected satisfaction. For years, Eli had viewed his morning routine as a private necessity, a weakness managed rather than a strength shared. Now, through alien eyes, he began to see it differently. Meanwhile, the mythology continued to evolve. Eli still caught whispers as he moved through the station, still noticed the deferential treatment from service personnel, still received curious glances from his human colleagues. But the nature of the interest seemed to be shifting, less about secret warrior status and more about genuine respect for whatever wisdom he might possess. He didn't correct these perceptions, not explicitly. When directly questioned, he answered truthfully about his background and training, but he no longer felt compelled to deny the underlying recognition that had sparked the Naxian's interest, the discipline he had developed in response to his inner battles. Because for the first time in years, his pain meant something to someone. The anxiety disorder that had followed him across light years, that had isolated him even among his own kind, was being recontextualized through Naxian perception. What humans often dismissed as a mental health issue requiring management, the Naxians viewed as a profound challenge requiring warrior-like response. And if training alone in the dark gave even one person hope. During his sixth demonstration session, Eli noticed a young Naxian observing from the back of the hall, smaller than the others, with less developed luminescent markings indicating early adolescence. The youth watched with unusual intensity, attempting to mimic each movement with precise attention to detail. After the session, while other observers engaged in their clicking conversations, the young Naxian approached hesitantly. "Technician Vance," the youth said in carefully practiced trade language. "May I ask a question?" "Of course," Eli replied, using a towel to wipe sweat from his face. "Is it true that you battle invisible enemies within your mind?" The directness of the question momentarily stunned Eli. He glanced around, but no adult Naxian seemed to be monitoring this interaction. "In a way," he answered carefully, "humans sometimes experience thoughts and feelings that create internal conflict. Physical discipline helps manage that conflict." The young Naxian's markings pulsed rapidly. "I experience similar conflicts. My thought patterns do not align with standard Naxian neurological sequences." Eli recognized the admission for what it was, a confession of difference, of struggle, something rarely acknowledged in Naxian culture, with its emphasis on collective harmony and standardized development. "And do these non-standard patterns cause you difficulty?" he asked gently. "Significant difficulty," the youth confirmed. "Conventional neural alignment techniques have proven ineffective." Eli knelt to bring himself level with the young Naxian's eyes. "Would you like to learn some of the specific exercises that help me most with thought regulation?" The youth's markings pulsed so brightly they nearly illuminated the space between them. "Yes, very much." For the next 30 minutes, Eli worked one-on-one with the young Naxian, adapting his techniques to suit the alien physiology. He emphasized controlled breathing, progressive muscle tension and release, and rhythmic movement patterns designed to interrupt anxious thought cycles. When they finished, the youth performed the formal gesture of respect with a precision that suggested significant practice. "Thank you, Warrior Vance." Eli started to correct the title, then stopped himself. If this mythology helped a young being struggling with mental differences find hope in techniques for self-regulation, then maybe the myth was better than the truth. Not because it elevated him to unearned status, but because it created a framework where his actual experience could benefit others. As the days passed, Eli's morning routine shifted from solitary practice to small group instruction. The observatory yard, once his private sanctuary, became a shared space of learning and quiet discipline. Humans and Naxians alike came to observe, some eventually participating, all treating the sessions with a respect that acknowledged their deeper purpose beyond mere physical exercise. Nali remained a constant presence, sometimes participating, sometimes documenting, always offering insights that bridged the cultural gap between human and Naxian understanding. "You've created something unique," she told him one morning after a particularly successful session. "A space where beings from different worlds recognize shared struggles and responses." "I never intended any of this," Eli admitted, watching as the participants dispersed, carrying their new knowledge back to their respective duties. "The most significant developments are rarely intentional," Nale observed. "They emerge from authentic responses to necessity." As they stood together in the gradually emptying observatory yard, Eli realized how dramatically his experience on Nexus Station had transformed. The anxiety that had once isolated him had become, through strange circumstance and alien interpretation, a source of connection and contribution. The irony wasn't lost on him. He had traveled across the stars seeking escape from his internal struggles, only to find purpose in sharing them with beings from another world. And maybe, just maybe, the mythology wasn't entirely wrong. Not about secret missions or covert identities, but about the warrior spirit required to face one's demons day after day, to develop discipline in response to invisible threats, to transform fear into focused action. Then maybe he'd keep training, just in case the legend ever had to become real. The alarm blared without warning, 3 sharp pulses followed by a sustained tone that penetrated every corner of Nexus Station. Eli had been calibrating an atmospheric regulator in the science sector when the sound cut through the normal background hum of station operations. His body tensed automatically, senses heightened, a response honed through countless emergency drills during his Earth assignments. But this was no drill. The quality of the alarm, combined with the immediate shift in lighting to emergency protocols, signaled a genuine crisis. The station's communication system activated. Attention all personnel. Containment breach in Research Laboratory 7. Biohazard protocols engaged. All non-essential personnel evacuate sectors 3 through 5 immediately. This is not an exercise. Research Laboratory 7, the Xenobiology Division, where experimental organisms from various worlds were studied under strict isolation procedures. A containment breach there could mean anything from harmless microbes to potentially lethal biological agents released into the station's atmosphere. Eli secured his tools and moved quickly toward the nearest evacuation route, joining streams of personnel flowing through the corridors. The organized movement suggested regular emergency training, but the tension in both human and Naxian faces revealed the unusual nature of this particular alert. As he reached a major junction, Eli noticed a Naxian security officer directing evacuation flow. The officer's markings pulsed with the rapid patterns of stress as she communicated simultaneously in trade language and Naxian clicking. Sectors 3 and 4 personnel proceed to primary shelter units, she instructed. Sector 5 proceed to secondary units. Maintain species segregation for medical monitoring purposes. Eli was about to continue with the flow when he caught sight of a familiar figure moving against the evacuation current. Nale, her slender form pushing upstream through the crowd. Nale, he called, changing direction to intercept her. What are you doing? We need to evacuate. Her luminescent markings pulsed with agitation. The containment breach, it's in the development chamber where our youth study group was scheduled today. Eli felt his chest tighten. The young ones are in there? With whatever broke containment? Yes, she confirmed. 23 pre-adult Naxians, including several with non-standard neurological patterns. Her eyes met his directly. Including Tavin, the youth you've been working with. The young Naxian who struggled with thought patterns similar to Eli's anxiety, who had been practicing the breathing techniques and focused movement exercises with dedicated precision. Are rescue teams deployed? Eli asked, already knowing what her answer would be. Standard protocol requires full containment verification before rescue teams enter. Minimum waiting period is 47 minutes. Nale's markings pulsed with what Eli now recognized as deep distress. By then, exposure effects may be irreversible for developing nervous systems. 47 minutes. Following protocol meant potentially sacrificing 23 young lives, or at minimum causing permanent neurological damage to being still in crucial developmental stages. What about the research staff? Weren't adults supervising? The alert came during transition period, Nale explained, when one research team exits before the next arrives. The youth were engaged in independent study under remote monitoring. The evacuation flow continued around them, station personnel moving with increasing urgency as emergency barriers began to seal off connecting corridors. Soon, the path to Laboratory 7 would be completely inaccessible. Eli made his decision in a heartbeat. How do we get to them? Nale's markings pulsed with surprise. We? You would risk exposure? Those kids need help now, not in 47 minutes. Eli was already accessing a nearby terminal, pulling up station schematics. Is there a maintenance access route? Something that bypasses the main barriers? Yes, Nale confirmed, moving beside him to indicate a pathway through the environmental service tunnels. But the inner laboratory doors will be sealed by containment protocols. We cannot override them without security clearance. Eli's mind raced through possibilities. We don't need to override them. There should be manual emergency releases inside the maintenance shaft, designed for technicians trapped during lockdown procedures. You know this? Nale asked, her tone suggesting this confirmed some aspect of the mythology surrounding him. It's standard emergency design, Eli corrected. I memorized the station's critical systems layout my first week here, part of maintenance training. They moved quickly against the dwindling evacuation flow, reaching a service entrance just as the final warning sounded for complete sector isolation. The maintenance shaft was narrow, designed for single-file progression through the station's infrastructure. Emergency lighting cast everything in eerie red illumination as they climbed through conduits and around massive air circulation systems. What exactly escaped containment? Eli asked as they navigated the complex pathway. What are we dealing with? Neurological adaptogens, Nale replied, her voice echoing slightly in the confined space. Experimental organisms that bond with neural tissue, creating temporary synaptic pathways? That sounds extremely dangerous. For adults with established neural patterns, Exposure effects are minimal and temporary, she explained. For developing systems still in neural formation phases, she didn't need to finish. Eli understood the implications. Young Naxians, particularly those already experiencing non-standard neurological development, would be especially vulnerable to organisms that altered synaptic pathways. They reached the access point nearest Laboratory 7 in under 10 minutes, record time through the maintenance network. Eli located the emergency release panel precisely where station schematics indicated it would be. This will trigger alarms, he warned as he prepared to activate the override. Security will know someone is entering against protocols. Understood, Nale acknowledged. Her markings pulsed with what Eli now recognized as resolute determination. The consequences are acceptable. Eli nodded, then activated the emergency release. The panel slid aside with a hydraulic hiss, revealing the inner chamber of Laboratory 7. The scene inside froze his blood. 23 young Naxians were scattered throughout the laboratory in various states of distress. Some lay completely still, their luminescent markings pulsing erratically. Others moved in uncoordinated patterns, bumping into equipment and walls as if unable to control their motor functions. A few huddled together in corners, their markings almost completely dark, a sign of severe neurological disruption. And throughout the chamber, barely visible even under emergency lighting, drifted what appeared to be luminous particles, the neurological adaptogens, now airborne and seeking new neural hosts. We need to get them out of here, Eli said, scanning the room for emergency equipment. Is there anything that can neutralize these organisms? Cold, Nali replied immediately. Extreme cold renders them dormant, but the laboratory's emergency cooling system would take at least 10 minutes to reach effective temperatures. 10 minutes too long for the young Naxians already showing severe symptoms. Eli spotted a rack of emergency breathing apparatus designed for toxic environment evacuation, standard equipment in all research laboratories. Those masks filter airborne particles, he said, pointing. If we can get them on the children, we can prevent further exposure while we evacuate. Yes, Nali agreed, but someone must move through the contaminated air to retrieve them. Eli didn't hesitate. I'll go. Adult human neural patterns should be less vulnerable, right? In theory, she confirmed, but exposure risks remain significant. Someone has to, Eli said simply, and before Nali could object further, he moved into the laboratory. The air felt strange against his skin, a subtle tingling sensation that suggested the adaptogens were already attempting to make contact with his nervous system. Eli focused on his breathing, using the techniques he practiced every morning: controlled inhalation, measured exhalation, maintaining mental discipline despite the growing disorientation that threatened his concentration. He reached the emergency equipment and began distributing masks to the nearest young Naxians, showing them how to secure the apparatus. Those still capable of coordinated movement helped their less responsive companions. Nali had entered behind him, moving with purposeful efficiency despite the risk, guiding the children toward the maintenance access point. As they worked, Eli felt the adaptogens' effects strengthening: random muscle twitches, momentary lapses in spatial awareness, strange flashes of sensory input that couldn't possibly be real. But the discipline of his daily training provided unexpected resistance. He maintained focus through the disorientation, continued functioning despite the growing neural interference. Eli! Nali's voice pierced through his increasingly scattered thoughts. Security teams approaching through main laboratory entrance. 60 seconds to forced entry. They had evacuated perhaps half the young Naxians into the relative safety of the maintenance shaft. The others remained too disoriented to move without direct assistance. Among them, Eli spotted Tavin, the young one who had approached him after training sessions, curled into a fetal position beneath a workstation, markings barely pulsing. Get the others to safety, Eli instructed Nali. I'll bring the rest. She hesitated only briefly before nodding, understanding the mathematics of the situation. One of them needed to guide the already evacuated youth through the maintenance network while the other continued retrieval efforts. As Nale disappeared into the access shaft with the first group, Eli moved deeper into the contaminated laboratory. The adaptogens' effects intensified with each passing second, creating strange perceptual distortions that made navigation increasingly difficult. Surfaces seemed to ripple. Distances expanded and contracted unpredictably. His limbs responded with frustrating delays to his mental commands, but he kept moving, kept breathing in the disciplined pattern that had become second nature through countless mornings of training, kept his mind focused on the immediate task despite the chaos attempting to overtake his neural pathways. He reached Tavin and knelt beside the young Naxian. Can you hear me? he asked, gently touching a shoulder. The youth's eyes opened, unfocused at first, then gradually centering on Eli's face. Warrior Vance, he whispered in trade language. The enemies. They're inside my mind. I know, Eli acknowledged. But remember what we practiced? Controlling your breath, focusing your thoughts, creating order from chaos. As he spoke, Eli demonstrated the breathing pattern they had practiced together during training sessions. Taven struggled to follow, his chest rising and falling in increasingly synchronized rhythm with Eli's example. Good, Eli encouraged. Now we need to move. Can you stand with help? The young Naxian nodded weakly. Eli secured a breathing mask over the youth's face, then helped him to his feet. Together they made their way toward another disoriented young one nearby, then another. Eli found himself reciting the focusing mantras from his morning routine aloud, creating a rhythm that the young Naxians could follow despite their neural disruption. The main laboratory doors began their emergency override sequence, security teams preparing to enter with protective gear and containment equipment. Eli guided his small group of young Naxians toward the maintenance access point, fighting through increasing neural disruption that made each step a concentrated effort of will. They reached the access point just as security personnel breached the main entrance. A human officer in full containment gear spotted Eli and shouted something that was lost in the alarms and the strange ringing now filling Eli's ears. He focused only on helping the final young Naxian into the maintenance shaft before following himself, securing the access panel behind them. The maintenance network was blessedly free of adaptogens, though Eli's neural symptoms continued, evidence that the organisms had already established preliminary connections with his nervous system. He guided the young Naxians through the narrow passageways, following emergency lighting toward the quarantine section, where Nalai would have taken the first group. Each movement required conscious effort now. Each thought had to be deliberately formed against the growing neural static. The discipline of 1,000 morning workouts became the framework that kept him functioning when his brain's normal pathways began to falter. They reached the quarantine section 27 minutes after the initial alarm. Medical personnel in protective gear immediately took charge of the young Naxians, administering neutralizing agents designed to render the adaptogens dormant without damaging developing neural tissue. Eli stayed conscious just long enough to see Taven safely transferred to a medical technician. Then the neural disruption finally overwhelmed his disciplined resistance, and darkness claimed him. Consciousness returned gradually in fragments of sensation and awareness. The distinctive antiseptic scent of the medical bay, the soft hum of monitoring equipment, the slight pressure of diagnostic sensors attached to his temples and chest. Eli opened his eyes to find himself in an isolation chamber within Nexus Station's medical sector. Through the transparent barrier, he could see medical personnel moving efficiently between similar units, containing patients he couldn't quite identify from his angle. Neural activity stabilizing, announced a voice from the communication system. Consciousness restored. Alert medical supervisor. Within moments, a human doctor appeared at the barrier, consulting a data pad. Technician Vance, how are you feeling? Eli took a moment to assess his condition. His thoughts felt unexpectedly clear, clearer perhaps than they had been in years. The background anxiety that had been his constant companion since childhood seemed strangely muted, almost absent. I feel good, he answered, surprise evident in his voice. Better than I should, considering what happened. The doctor nodded, making notes. Interesting, but not unexpected. The adaptogens appear to have created novel neural pathways in your brain, particularly in regions associated with anxiety processing and threat assessment. We're seeing similar effects in other adult human rescuers. The children, Eli said, suddenly remembering. The young Naxians, are they all right? All 23 survived, the doctor confirmed, though recovery trajectories vary depending on exposure duration and pre-existing neural conditions. Their systems are more vulnerable than adult humans to permanent alterations. Relief washed through Eli. Are they here? In medical? They've been transferred to the Naxian Healing Center on Level 8. Their neural regeneration requires specialized techniques beyond our equipment capabilities. The doctor adjusted something on the data pad. You've been unconscious for approximately 36 hours, while your brain established new equilibrium with the neural changes. 36 hours. The information should have alarmed him, but Eli felt only calm acceptance. When can I leave isolation? Your adaptogen presence has dropped below contagion threshold, the doctor replied. We can release you to regular medical observation within the hour, assuming neural stability maintains. As promised, Eli was transferred to a standard medical bay shortly thereafter. The monitoring continued, but with less intensive equipment and without isolation barriers. Human nurses and Naxian medical technicians moved through the room with practiced efficiency, checking patients and updating records. He was dozing lightly when a familiar voice roused him. "The warrior awakens?" Eli opened his eyes to find Nale standing beside his bed, her luminescent markings pulsing with what he now recognized as relief and pleasure. "Not a warrior," he reminded her, though without his usual insistence. "Just a technician who acted when needed." "The distinction seems increasingly meaningless," she observed, settling into the visitor's chair beside his bed. "Your physical and mental discipline preserved your functionality despite neural disruption that incapacitated others. If that is not the essence of a warrior, what is?" Eli couldn't find a compelling counter-argument. Perhaps the mythology had contained more truth than he'd been willing to acknowledge. "How are the young ones?" he asked instead. "I heard they're all alive, but recovering differently." "Yes," Nale confirmed. "Most will resume normal development with minimal long-term effects. A few experienced more significant neural alterations and will require extended healing cycles." Her markings pulsed with what Eli interpreted as deep gratitude. "But all survived. Because of you." "Because of us," he corrected. "You entered the contaminated lab too." She acknowledged this with a slight tilt of her head. "I visited the healing center before coming here. The young ones ask about you, particularly Tavin, who tells anyone who will listen how Warrior Vance taught him to focus his mind against the neural invaders." Despite himself, Eli smiled. "I just reminded him of the techniques we practiced together." "Techniques that possibly saved his developing neural network from permanent disruption," Nale pointed out. "The healing specialists believe his focused breathing helped limit adaptogen integration to less critical neural pathways." They sat in comfortable silence for several minutes, Eli absorbing the implications of what had happened. Finally, he asked the question that had been forming since he regained consciousness. "The adaptogens? The doctor mentioned they created new neural pathways in my brain, particularly in regions associated with anxiety processing." He met Nale's silvery gaze directly. "Have I been changed?" Her markings pulsed in the pattern he associated with thoughtful consideration. "All significant experiences change us, Eli Vance, whether through conventional neural development or, in this case, more direct intervention. That's not an answer. The complete answer requires more study," she acknowledged, "but preliminary assessments suggest the adaptogens created alternative processing pathways for certain neural signals, particularly those associated with what humans call anxiety disorders." Eli processed this information with surprising calm. "You're saying they rewired my brain to bypass my anxiety responses?" "Not eliminate, but potentially modify," Nale clarified. "The long-term implications remain unclear. Neural adaptations of this nature have never been studied in humans before." "I feel different," Eli admitted. "Calmer, more centered, like the state I used to achieve after my most focused training sessions, but without the effort." "A potential benefit from an unexpected source," Nale observed, "though one that carries ethical considerations about neural modification that our scientists will debate for cycles to come." Before Eli could respond, the door to the medical bay slid open to admit an unexpected visitor, Elder Kashin, senior member of the Naxian High Council. The ancient Naxian moved with deliberate grace to Eli's bedside, luminescent markings pulsing with formal patterns that indicated official business. Both Nale and Eli straightened instinctively in the presence of such high authority. The elder performed the ceremonial gesture of respect, one typically reserved for those of equal status, not subordinates. "Technician Vance," Elder Kashin greeted him, "your actions during the containment breach have been reviewed by the High Council." Eli tensed slightly, anticipating reprimand for violating emergency protocols. "Elder, I understand that entering the laboratory against security directives was a breach of station regulations." The elder raised a hand, stopping his explanation. "The council does not concern itself with procedural technicalities when lives are preserved through decisive action." The ancient Naxian's markings pulsed with what Eli interpreted as deep approval. 23 of our young ones survived because you prioritized their safety above protocol compliance." "I just did what seemed necessary in the moment," Eli said, uncomfortable with the implied heroism. "Precisely," Elder Kashin agreed. "When crisis arose, you acted according to your true nature, rather than assigned function. This confirms what many have observed since your training practices were first noticed. Eli glanced at Nali, who watched the exchange with intense interest. And what is that, Elder? That designation does not always align with essence, the ancient Naxian replied, that sometimes beings carry capabilities beyond their formal classification. The Elder produced a small crystalline object from within the folds of his formal attire. The Council has authorized your inclusion in the Guardian Protocol, a designation previously limited to Naxians with specialized crisis response training. Eli stared at the crystal, understanding its significance from his cultural orientation briefings. Guardian Protocol participants served as certified first responders during station emergencies, with authority that transcended normal hierarchical constraints in crisis situations. I'm honored, he said carefully, but I'm still just a maintenance technician. I have no special qualifications for emergency response beyond standard training. Your actions demonstrate otherwise, Elder Kashin stated with finality. The Council recognizes essence over designation. Will you accept? Eli looked from the crystal to Nale, whose markings pulsed with encouragement, then back to the Elder. A decision point had arrived, one that would confirm or redirect the mythology that had developed around him. In that moment, with surprising clarity, Eli realized the choice was not between truth and fiction. It was between limiting himself to who he had always believed he was, or accepting the possibility of being something more. Something forged in the crucible of his own internal battles, now recognized and valued by an alien civilization that saw beyond human classifications. I accept, he said, taking the crystal, and I will do my best to be worthy of this trust. Elder Kashin's markings pulsed with satisfaction. The ceremony of induction will be scheduled once medical clearance is granted. Until then, focus on your recovery. After the Elder departed, Nali regarded Eli with those perceptive silver eyes. You have concerns still? What if the adaptogen's effects aren't permanent? He asked, voicing the fear that had formed beneath his surface thoughts. What if my anxiety returns to previous levels and I can't function as expected in a crisis? Then you will continue as you always have, she replied simply, using discipline and focused intention to overcome internal obstacles. The Guardian Protocol recognizes your approach, not just your neural state. Her words settled something within him, a recognition that his value wasn't in being fearless, but in how he responded to fear. Not in being perfect, but in maintaining function despite imperfection. As medical staff arrived to conduct another round of neural assessments, Eli found himself contemplating the strange journey that had brought him to this point. From solitary morning workouts designed to manage his anxiety, to formal recognition as someone trusted to act decisively in moments of crisis. The mythology hadn't been entirely wrong after all. Not about secret missions or covert identities, but about something more fundamental, that sometimes the battles fought within oneself prepare one for challenges no training program could anticipate. And maybe the legend had become real. And maybe he'd keep training, just in case the legend ever had to become real. 3 weeks after the containment breach, Eli returned to the observatory yard for his morning routine. Dawn hadn't yet broken over the massive transparent ceiling, leaving the stars brilliantly visible against the void. The familiar metal floor pressed cool against his palms as he began his warm-up exercises. Much had changed. The neural adaptations from adaptogen exposure had stabilized, creating what the medical team called alternative processing pathways for his anxiety responses. The constant background dread that had been his lifelong companion was now manageable in ways medication and conventional therapy had never achieved. Not eliminated, he still experienced anxious thoughts, but the physical manifestations no longer overwhelmed his function. His official designation remained technician, but now carried the additional classification of Guardian Protocol participant. His daily schedule included not just maintenance duties, but also training sessions where he shared physical discipline techniques with both human and Naxian station personnel. And he was no longer alone in the observatory yard during these early hours. Your form has improved, Eli noted as Taven completed a series of controlled breathing exercises combined with precise movements designed to enhance neural focus. The young Naxian's recovery had progressed remarkably well, his developing neural system adapting to the adaptogen alterations with the resilience characteristic of youth. I practice daily, Taven replied, transitioned smoothly into the next sequence. The healing specialists say these exercises accelerate neural integration. Nearby, 4 other young Naxians moved through similar routines, each adapted to their specific recovery needs. Beyond them, a small group of adult Naxians and humans observed quietly, some beginning to mirror the movements, others taking notes on personal devices. The mythology had evolved too. No longer did whispers follow Eli through the station corridors about secret warrior status or hidden missions. Instead, the stories focused on something closer to truth. How discipline developed for internal battles had proven valuable during external crisis. How techniques born from managing personal struggle could benefit others facing similar challenges. Nalai arrived as the artificial dawn sequence began, illuminating the yard in gradually warming light. Her luminescent markings pulsed with greeting as she took her place beside Eli. "The exchange committee has approved your proposal," she informed him as they moved synchronously through a series of stretches. "Neural resilience training will be included in the next information packet transmitted to Earth." Eli nodded, satisfaction warming him more effectively than the simulated sunlight now filling the observatory yard. The techniques that had preserved his function during adaptogen exposure and potentially saved young Naxian lives would now be shared with human medical researchers. Perhaps others who struggled with anxiety disorders similar to his own would benefit from what he had discovered through necessity. "And the Guardian Protocol?" he asked. "Any word on expanding human participation?" "3 additional candidates have been identified," Nali confirmed, all with neural patterns suggesting adaptability to crisis situations. "The High Council will review their qualifications next cycle." The training session continued as more participants arrived, the observatory yard gradually filling with beings from 2 worlds moving in disciplined unison. Eli guided them through sequences designed to enhance neural focus while strengthening physical responsiveness, a hybrid methodology emerging from human exercise traditions and Naxian neuroscience. When the formal session concluded, most participants departed for their daily duties, leaving Eli and Nali alone in the gradually emptying space. They completed their personal routines in comfortable silence before moving to the observation deck that had become their regular meeting place. The nebula visible through the transparent walls had shifted position slightly over the weeks, its swirling gases now illuminated differently by the system's distant star. Once, the vast emptiness of space had triggered Eli's anxiety responses. Now he viewed it with calm appreciation for its complex beauty. "You seem at peace," Nalay observed, her perceptive gaze studying his features. "Not entirely," Eli admitted, "but more than before. The adaptogens changed something fundamental in how my brain processes fear responses. Yet you continue training with the same discipline," she noted, despite the reduced neural necessity. Eli considered this observation. She was right. Though his anxiety had diminished significantly, his commitment to his morning routine remained unwavering. He still rose before artificial dawn, still practiced with focused intention, still maintained the discipline that had defined his response to internal struggle. "I train differently now," he realized aloud, "not just for myself, for those who might benefit from what I've learned through experience." "And," Nali prompted, sensing more behind his words. Eli smiled slightly. "And maybe, just in case." "In case of what?" "In case I'm needed again," he answered honestly. "In case the adaptogen's effects diminish over time. In case another crisis arises that requires the person your people saw in me before I recognized it myself." Nali's markings pulsed with what he now recognized as profound understanding. "You trained to maintain what was forged through necessity, to honor the truth behind the mythology." "Something like that," he acknowledged. They watched the nebula in comfortable silence, each contemplating the strange journey that had brought them to this point of shared understanding across species boundaries. A journey that began with a solitary human performing simple exercises to manage his anxiety, observed by a curious alien who saw something more significant in his disciplined movements. "Will you tell them?" Nali asked finally. "Your human colleagues, about the anxiety disorder that shaped your techniques." Eli had been considering this question since his release from medical observation. Once he had carefully concealed his mental health struggles, fearing they would be seen as weakness or liability. Now he viewed them differently, as the crucible that had formed capabilities others found valuable. Yes, he decided, not as confession, but as context. Understanding the origin of these techniques may help others adapt them more effectively to their own needs. Nali's markings pulsed with approval. Transparency often reveals strength rather than vulnerability. As they prepared to depart for their respective duties, Eli paused at the observation deck entrance. "You know, I never thanked you properly." "For what?" she asked, head tilting in curiosity. "For watching me that first morning, for seeing something I didn't see in myself." Her markings pulsed with the Naxian equivalent of a smile. Perhaps that is the true purpose of different species encountering one another, to reflect back capabilities and potential otherwise hidden from self-perception. Eli nodded, recognizing the wisdom in her observation. I still don't think I'm the legendary warrior your people initially imagined. No, Nolly agreed as they stepped into the corridor. You are something far more valuable, a being who transformed internal struggle into disciplined strength, then shared that transformation with others. As they parted ways, Eli realized the mythology had served its purpose, not by being literally true, but by creating a framework where actual truth could emerge and develop. The legend had helped him recognize capabilities within himself that anxiety and self-doubt had obscured, and so he would continue training in the observatory yard each morning before dawn. Not to maintain a fiction or perpetuate a mythology, not even primarily to manage his anxiety, which the adaptogens had rendered more manageable than ever before, but to honor what had been forged through necessity, to maintain the discipline that had proven valuable beyond his personal struggles, to share with others what he had discovered through his own journey. And maybe, just in case the legend ever had to become real again. Because sometimes the stories others tell about us reveal potentials we ourselves have yet to recognize. Sometimes being seen as something more than we believe ourselves to be creates the possibility of growing into that perception. In the endless stars above Nexus Station, Eli had found not escape from his internal battles, but recognition of their value. Not cure for his anxiety, but purpose for the discipline it had necessitated.